There are few things in life that can truly break a person: heartbreak, debt, and factory lunch breaks. If you've never worked 12 hours straight in a building where the machines never sleep and the air tastes like burnt dust, then maybe you won't understand the importance of a lunch. But for people like me, lunch isn't a break. Lunch is survival. It's hope packed in Tupperware. It's the one moment where you can forget that your back hurts, your feet hurt, and your brain has been screaming at you since dawn to quit this job forever. Lunch is sacred. 3 years ago, I learned just how fragile that sacred little piece of happiness can be. I worked in a massive factory where everything was loud. The machines, the alarms, even the silence in between. The building was so big that sometimes I joked it had its own weather system. It wasn't a place where people built careers. It was a place where temp workers revolved in and out, like the factory doors were spinning too fast to ever let someone settle down. New faces showed up every shift like ghosts with name badges. Half of them didn't even bother introducing themselves because they knew they wouldn't last. So nobody cared about anyone else. No friendships, no camaraderie. Just survival. Which means, when something goes wrong, there's no one to trust. And something did go wrong. Something personal. Something unforgivable. Someone started stealing my lunch, not just once, not twice, but every single day for almost a week. 6 days, 6 lunchboxes, 6 meals I prepared with my tired hands after dragging myself home at night. While I worked hungry, someone else was dining like a king off my pain. Every afternoon, I'd walk into that little lunchroom, a room with buzzing old fluorescent lights and a fridge that tilted slightly like it had given up on life. And I'd open that fridge door, praying my food was still there, and every time, my heart sank. Nothing. Empty space where my joy should have been. The first day, I tried to laugh it off. Maybe I forgot to bring it, but no. The memory of packing my lunch was crystal clear. Day 2, I felt confused. Day 3, the confusion turned to suspicion. By the 4th day, suspicion turned into anger. By the 5th, anger turned into cold, burning hatred. And by the 6th day, I wasn't a man anymore. I was a starving animal, ready to bite someone's head off. Do you know what it's like to work 12 hours with no real food? Sure, the break room had vending machines, but those machines only existed to remind me what failure tastes like. Warm soda, salted sadness, crumbs of a crushed cookie that cost more than my dignity. Every time my stomach growled, I pictured the thief sitting somewhere in a dark corner, chewing my food with no remorse, smiling, laughing, probably licking his greasy fingers while I chewed on disappointment. I became obsessed. I started watching people. Every break, every movement, every suspicious bite of food. Was that my sandwich he was eating? Was that my leftover chicken curry she just grabbed from the fridge? I stared so hard that people probably thought I was losing my mind. And maybe I was. Hunger can do that. It can unravel the civilized person you pretend to be. But the thief was smart. They struck when the lunchroom was empty. They left no clues, no crumbs, no evidence. They didn't panic. They were confident, almost arrogant. And somehow, deep inside, that bothered me more than the stealing itself. Because I wasn't just angry about the food. I was angry about the disrespect. Someone looked at my name written on that container, my identity, and decided it meant nothing, that I meant nothing. That was the day a very dark thought entered my mind: revenge. I didn't jump to it immediately. First, I tried civilized solutions. I wrote notes. I hid my food behind other items. I even triple-wrapped one lunch like it was a precious artifact being smuggled out of a museum. I started arriving early to place it deep inside the fridge and lingering around to see who came near it. Nothing worked. The thief was bold, unstoppable, a silent predator of refrigeration. Night after night, as I stood in my tiny kitchen staring at empty counters where my meal should have been, the rage inside me grew. And then I found the idea, the perfect idea, something righteous, something fiery, something that would send a message without a single word being spoken. I was going to cook justice. The plan formed slowly at first, a whisper in the back of my thirsting brain. But as I stood in the supermarket aisle later that day, staring at the produce section, that whisper turned into a battle cry. My eyes locked onto the dark red, wrinkled little monsters sitting innocently in a small basket. Carolina Reapers, the hottest peppers on planet Earth. A pepper so violent that it can make your eyes cry before it even touches your tongue. A pepper that doesn't just burn your mouth. It burns your soul. Some people faint eating it. Others throw up. A few question the purpose of existence, and I thought, yes, this is exactly the kind of lesson that Lunch Thief needs. I filled my basket with fresh steak, tortillas, tomatoes, onions, cilantro, limes, and the star of the show, those evil little peppers. When I got home, I washed my hands like a surgeon preparing for an operation, because this wasn't cooking anymore. This was war. I sliced the steak thin and marinated it with spices that smelled like victory. I chopped the vegetables with precision, each cut fueled by a week's worth of agony. And finally, the peppers. I put on gloves, because I value my hands, and diced those tiny devils into the most dangerous pico de gallo the world has ever seen. The fumes alone nearly knocked me out. My eyes burned. My tongue tingled just because I breathed too close. But through the tears, I smiled. When the fajitas were finished, they looked beautiful. The kind of meal that makes you want to write poetry. But beauty here was a trap. A glossy red warning disguised as perfection. I packed the fajitas inside a clean Tupperware container and placed lime wedges and a sprinkle of cilantro right on top. I made it look appetizing, tempting, impossible to resist. Because I knew the thief couldn't resist. They had proven that already. The next morning, I walked into work, feeling something I hadn't felt all week. Satisfaction. My soul was humming like a machine freshly oiled. I placed the Tupperware in the fridge with a confidence that probably made angels blush. Then I walked away like nothing happened, heart pounding with excitement. All that was left to do was wait. The first hour passed, and then a scream cut through the noisy factory like lightning splitting the sky. A woman yelled for help, and every worker around me turned their heads. My heartbeat quickened, but my face stayed calm. Or at least, I hope it did. I rushed toward the lunchroom, acting concerned, while inside I felt fireworks exploding. And then I saw it, the lunchbox. Bandit himself lying flat on the floor, clutching his chest, wheezing like he had inhaled fire. Sweat poured down his face like someone had turned his skin into a waterfall. His eyes were wide, terrified, as if the devil had personally kicked him in the throat. He gasped for air, but air refused to cooperate. His hands trembled like he was trying to claw the heat out of his body. Someone yelled that he was having trouble breathing. Someone else called for medical help. And everyone stared in horror because, well, This wasn't normal spice. This was hell condensed into food form. I didn't move. I just watched from a corner as paramedics rushed in, lifted him onto a stretcher, and carried him away. My fajitas remained half-eaten on the lunch table, mocking him with their fresh garnish. Justice had been served. Hot. Later I learned he had asthma. The peppers triggered a severe attack. He could have died. And for a tiny moment, a very tiny one, guilt tapped on my shoulder. But then hunger slapped guilt across the face. Because he didn't have to eat my food. He made a choice. A stupid one. The factory eventually learned one undeniable truth that day. There is a reason food has names written on it. Stealing someone's lunch isn't a harmless prank. It's disrespect. It's violating the only joy a person may have in a long and miserable workday. And sometimes people like me choose to fight back. The thief never confessed. Not a word. How could he? Imagine telling everyone that you collapsed because you stole a spicy lunch like an idiot. He kept his silence, and I kept mine. Weeks passed. People brought lunch from home with newfound caution. Some even added locks to their bags. But nobody touched my food ever again. My lunches stayed untouched, respected, almost feared. My name written on a container became a warning instead of a label. Even now, years later, I still think about that day sometimes. I think about the screams, the chaos, the triumphant flavor of revenge, and I realize something important. Some lessons in life must be learned the hard way. If you're listening to this story while enjoying a meal, take a look at it, appreciate it. Imagine someone reaching in and taking that joy away from you every single day. How long would it take before you snapped? Before hunger turned you into something darker? That's what happened to me. So if you ever find yourself inside a workplace fridge, tempted to grab something that doesn't belong to you, remember this story. Remember the man who almost flew to the afterlife on a fajita coated with Satan's tears. Lunch is sacred. Respect the lunch. Respect the name on the lid. And if you don't be surprised when karma decides to spice things up. He never said anything. And neither did I, until now. From that day forward, the lunchroom became a place of whispered rumors and uneasy glances. The incident had spread fast. Nobody knew who the man gasping on the floor was until HR dragged his employee file out like it was contraband evidence. His name was Kyle. Just another shadow drifting through the factory, working the machines on night shifts, barely speaking to anyone. A ghost in a hairnet. And yet, he was the one bold enough to take what wasn't his. Over and over again, management chalked it up to a food allergy reaction. But we all knew it was something else. Something hotter, something that burned more than pepper ever could. People avoided the fridge after that. Even the microwave sat untouched, humming quietly like they were afraid to attract attention. But me? I kept my quiet victory tucked behind my teeth, pretending I didn't know a damn thing while secretly wondering if justice had gone too far. Because after Kyle came back from the hospital, everything changed. He didn't look like the same guy who once strutted through the break rooms stealing meals. His eyes were different, paranoid, restless. It was as if he could still taste fire in the back of his throat. And the worst part? He wasn't the only one watching. I'd noticed people tracking me with their eyes now, like they were trying to guess whether I was the monster in the story or the hero who finally snapped. The whispers grew claws. Who would put peppers like that in a lunch? Must be some psycho. Someone could have died. Every time someone said it, Guilt pressed its cold fingers deeper into my stomach. I wanted to believe I was justified, that 6 days without food after 12-hour shifts would turn anyone into a villain. Still, asthma? An ambulance? Maybe I should have just left a note. Something like, "Touch my lunch again, and you'll regret it." But the Carolina Reaper made a louder statement, a permanent one. For a while, things went silent. Lunches remained untouched. The fridge regained its peace. I actually enjoyed food again, warm meals, full stomach, no paranoia. I thought the story had ended. I thought that was my happily ever after. But the universe doesn't like loose ends. The bandit wasn't done. And in a factory full of strangers, revenge was just waiting for the clock to hit. Break time. Days passed, and although no one openly mentioned what happened to Kyle, the factory atmosphere had shifted. Like a storm lingering just out of sight, every clang of metal, every hiss of machinery felt sharper, heavier. I tried to convince myself that I could move on, that the worst was behind me. But then, one afternoon I went to grab my drink from the fridge and stopped dead. My lunch wasn't gone. Someone had cracked the lid open slightly and left it there untouched, but discovered it wasn't theft anymore. It was a message. Someone was letting me know, "I see you." My heart thudded against my ribs as I scanned the break room. A few workers sat at tables, chewing silently, eyes flicking in my direction before darting away again. Suspicion dripped into the room like oil. They weren't just wondering anymore. They were watching. Every moment afterward felt like walking through a maze built of paranoia. In the production line, whispers rippled behind my back like tiny knives. I'd turn and catch people staring, only for them to snap their heads away as if they'd been caught shoplifting. The weirdest part? Kyle, the man who nearly met death by pepper, avoided me completely. Not the usual kind of avoidance. No, this was something darker. He watched me from corners, from across safety barriers, from behind stacks of boxed parts. He'd pause his work just to stare, like he was memorizing me. I'd feel his gaze before I'd see him, cold and invasive, creeping up my spine until I'd have to quickly look around just to prove I wasn't imagining it. Sleep became a stranger. The moment I closed my eyes, I'd picture Kyle choking, clawing at his throat, his eyes bulging with terror, and me standing there, holding a lunch that might as well have been a weapon. I had wanted a simple punishment, a warning, not a nightmare that followed me home. I'd wake drenched in sweat, convinced someone broke into my house. Maybe it was karma, or maybe just guilt wearing a disguise. The line between the two started blurring fast. Then one night, after another shift that felt like an interrogation, I stayed back a few minutes to breathe, to remind myself why I came here in the first place. To work, to survive, not to play detective in a building full of strangers. I thought I was alone, until I heard footsteps, slow, dragging, echoing off metal walls. I called out, but nobody answered. The footsteps stopped. Just stopped. When I turned, Kyle was standing a few feet behind me, face pale, eyes sunken, breathing like he still tasted the Reaper. He didn't speak. He just stared, unblinking, like he was daring me to confess. Like he already knew everything. I mumbled a nervous joke, something about late shifts turning us into zombies. But his expression never changed. Not even a twitch. After a long, silent moment, he finally walked past me, shoulder brushing mine, and whispered, just loud enough to freeze my blood, "Someone's gonna pay for what happened." His voice was broken, scraped raw, but full of certainty. And suddenly, It wasn't about stolen food anymore. It was a countdown. After Kyle's chilling warning, every shift felt like a trap waiting to snap shut. I tried to stay invisible, head down, work fast, take my breaks alone. But in a factory full of rumors, silence only paints you brighter. People talked with their eyes, accusing without a single word. It was a strange kind of punishment. Not from management, but from the court of hungry co-workers who now believed I had poison in my hands. One day, during my lunch break, I cautiously opened the fridge. My heart dropped. My lunch wasn't there. Again. But before panic could set in, I noticed something else. A brown paper bag sitting right in the center of the shelf. My name was written across it in a rushed, jagged scrawl. I stood frozen, staring at it like it was a bomb wired to explode at the slightest touch. Who would give me a lunch? And more importantly, why I didn't touch it? I wasn't stupid enough to eat mystery food after all that had happened. Instead, I backed away from it slowly, left the break room, and forced myself to work through the hunger. But later that evening, I came back to the break room to clock out, and the bag was still there, only this time it was open. The sandwich inside was half-eaten, and a sticky note was placed right beside it. Next time, it's you, my hands shook. My pulse punched against my skull. It wasn't paranoia anymore. Someone wanted payback, and they didn't care who they had to hurt to deliver it. I looked around, expecting to see eyes watching from the dark corners. But the room was silent. Too silent. The next day, things escalated. When I arrived at my workstation, the toolbox I always kept locked was already unlatched. Inside, my tools were scattered, each of them smeared with something dark red. At first, I thought it was rust, but when I wiped it with my thumb, a metallic scent hit me. It was blood. Fresh. Thick. A silent threat disguised as a message. You drew first blood. Now it's our turn. I wanted to go to HR. I wanted to tell someone. But what would I even say? I spiced up my own food, and someone ate it without permission. I was no victim, and I sure as hell wasn't innocent. Hours dragged like chains. Every sound felt hostile. Boots against concrete, metal against metal. The factory that once felt massive now felt like a cage. And at the center of it, the person who nearly choked to death because of me was still out there, still breathing fire, still hungry. That night, as I walked to my car in the dim parking lot, I heard the soft click of a camera shutter. I whipped around. No one. Just darkness swallowing the edges of the asphalt. I checked my phone. The battery was dead. Perfect timing. Then a voice floated from behind a nearby row of dumpsters. Cold, low, and close enough to touch my spine. You like surprises, don't you? I spun toward the sound, but whoever said it had already disappeared, leaving only footprints in a thin trail of oil leading into the night. The truth finally hit me. Thought I scared the lunchbox bandit, but all I did was create a new one. Hotter, smarter, and hungry for something much darker than food. I didn't sleep that night. Every second ticked like a countdown towards something I couldn't avoid. By the time the morning sun crawled over the horizon, my mind had already convinced itself that today was the day. Either this ended, or I did. When I reached the factory gate, security cameras watched like silent witnesses. The usual noise, workers joking, forklifts beeping, was missing. Instead, there was a thick silence, the kind that makes you breathe slower, just in case the air itself is listening. I clocked in and headed toward my station, only to freeze halfway. There, taped across the steel paneling of my machine, was a single photograph. Kyle in the lunchroom, clutching my fajita container, gasping for air, eyes rolling back, face twisted in pain. And right behind him, me, standing, watching, not helping. Someone had staged the shot. Someone had waited. Someone was collecting evidence. I ripped the photo down just as footsteps approached. Kyle stepped out from behind the machinery. Slow, deliberate, like a wolf finally cornering its prey. His inhaler dangled from his fingers. There was a look in his eyes that wasn't anger anymore. It was hunger. Hunger for justice. Or revenge. I couldn't tell the difference anymore. "You think it was funny?" he rasped. I opened my mouth, but guilt strangled the words. "You think I deserved to almost die?" he continued, voice trembling with rage held barely in restraint. "That's not what I tried, but he cut me off. You poisoned me." Those 3 words hit harder than any punch. I didn't poison anyone. "You stole." I started, but the memory of him choking stopped me. It didn't matter why I did it. What mattered was what happened. Kyle stepped closer and placed something in my hands. My old Tupperware, the same one that started it all. Except this time, the lid was sealed tight. And inside, I saw red, a familiar red, a sauce made from the same thing that nearly killed him. "Eat," he whispered. Suddenly the factory didn't feel like a workplace. It felt like a courtroom. And Kyle, he was judge, jury, and executioner. I stared at the container, my heartbeat echoing in my skull. If I refused, I was admitting guilt. If I accepted, I could end up like him. I could choke, collapse, die. I took a deep breath and slowly pushed the container back toward him. "No," I said. "I'm done playing games." For a split second I thought he would snap, attack me. But instead, something unexpected happened. His face cracked, not with anger, but with defeat. "You should have just said sorry," he muttered quietly. Then he dropped the container, letting it hit the ground with a dull thud. He turned away and walked off, shoulders slumped, breathing heavy. But just before he disappeared behind the machinery, he looked back one last time. "Just remember," he said, voice like a dying ember. "Some people steal lunch because they have nothing else." And then he was gone, like smoke, like guilt, like a warning. The universe gives you only once. I stood there, frozen as the lunch container leaked red across the concrete. And that's when I realized the real crime wasn't the pepper or the stolen food. It was forgetting that desperation turns good people into thieves, and fear turns the rest of us into monsters. Since that day, no one ever touched my lunch again. No one had to, because now I pack 2, one for me, and one for whoever needs it more. This was Nightfall Narratives. And sometimes the scariest stories aren't the ones about ghosts, but the ones about people. If you enjoyed this story, well, there's more where that came from. Subscribe, drop a like, and let me know in the comments what you would have done. Until next time, don't forget to check your lunch, 'cause someone else might be checking it too.